Okay, hi guys, Stephen here, Gagan and Nigel. We wanted to follow up on the great virtual gathering we had um, back on the 25th of August. We felt that we had a nice long global conversation and we just wanted to summarize some of the main findings. So I'm going to basically talk for a bit about what Ireland 101 does, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nigel. So I just want to share my screen there if that's okay for you guys. So my name is Stephen Tracy. Can you guys see that screen okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And I've been working in the areas of diaspora and bringing global families together. And County Kerry asked us to reach out to the McCarthy families, and we got to know Nigel. So today is really just a recap of Nigel's great work in the McCarthy surname study. And then we're going to tell you a couple of things that we're doing. So I did a TEDx talk on this whole topic of bringing globally scattered families together, and it's available on the TED.com site. So it's handy to understand the opportunity as it relates to bringing everybody together. And we saw a little bit of that the other night. So the McCarthys, what do we know so far? There are 187,343 McCarthys. About 54.9% are in America, and then it's spread out between Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. We've already mapped 8,127 McCarthys all over the world. So it's an interesting, you can actually go on to the maps on our Ireland 101 McCarthy page and zoom in and get a feel for where the McCarthys are today. We did the first virtual gathering a few weeks ago. And look, it was a test. We're working on new, better ways to bring people together. But in general, we were delighted with it that we had people from all over North America, Canada, the UK, and Ireland, Arizona, Florida, Tennessee, Georgia. There's a real spread of people around there. And the next thing is really to just give you guys ways in which you can come together. So what have we done? We have the central McCarthy page. If you just go onto Ireland101.com and you type in McCarthy, you'll see that there's ways in which to capture the history, build a community, and get a sense of how big the McCarthy family is. We have the opportunity to add in comments, put up your historic photographs, family trees, missing ancestors, history questions, genealogy, family tree linkages, family stories. Not, we want to see not just the kind of the historic stuff, but also some of the human interest stuff. I mean, a lot of you McCarthys, you've got some incredible stories around the world, and we've got a place then to kind of put that up and archive it. We're working with a lot of families around the world, and they're asking for us to build these kinds of tools and facilities. More recently, we've now got a dedicated family room for the McCarthys. That's leaders.ireland101.com/McCarthy. That's a place for all the McCarthys to come together. And broadly speaking, people want to come together and talk about their family trees, gather as a group. And generally, groups will have like an annual gathering somewhere, usually in the home country, but they can be anywhere else as well. We saw there was a mini McCarthy gathering there in Calgary, so that's really exciting. So look, Nigel's been able to put forward incredible detail as to the footprint of the McCarthys around County Kerry and beyond, and that's the kind of project that we'd like to help the McCarthys come together to map out. And we did that with the O'Malleys. We created a trail that when any of the O'Malleys are coming over, they're spread over Mayo, Galway, and Limerick, and together with the O'Malleys, we've been able to create a bit of a trail. The O'Malleys, for example, are meeting every year in June. We'll do about 500 O'Malleys. We'll help them come together in Clare Island next year. So on the back of that, then Nigel's been great at helping me come together with specifics for the landmarks across Ireland, and we'll go ahead and map those. And we'd love help from any of the McCarthys that are interested in that particular project. And again, it's just our role is really to bring families together and learn about our culture, learn about our history. So look, with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Nigel. If you want to just talk me through when you want me to switch slides, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Just to introduce myself, I'm a retired septuagenarian. I spent much of my working life as a project engineer, developing engineering for the petrochemical construction industry. I first began investigating my family history in the late 70s. Unable to make firm connections beyond the East End of London, I delved into Y-DNA testing in 2008 and was landed with the administration of the McCarthy surname study in 2010. By 2013, I had co-founded 2 further projects with friends I had made in the genetic genealogy community, Elizabeth O'Donoghue and the late Finbar O'Mahony. These were the Munster Irish Project and a project devoted to the most common male genetic signature in the south of Munster, namely the R1b CTS4466 Plus project. The latter has consumed as much of my time as the McCarthy surname study ever since. In 2016, I took on some admin assistance for the McCarthy study, concerned to establish a succession. I handed over the reins to Zena McCarthy-Pace in 2020. Colette O'Sullivan-Ngoyen and myself are responsible for data analysis and genetic tree presentation, while Fintan and Padraig McCarthy provide expertise in specifically Irish content. Matthew McCarthy looks after our Facebook site. Our principal websites are as advertised on this first slide, that provided by Family Tree DNA or FTDNA, whom we use for almost all our DNA testing, and our scrapbook for material which cannot be accommodated on the FTDNA site. I wish also to point out at this stage 2 recently published books on tracing your McCarthy family tree. The first, coordinated by our study member Richard McCarthy, and with a foreword by his second cousin once removed, John McCarthy MBE, and a contribution by myself, is for beginners, but takes the research through to the necessity of taking a Y-DNA test and explains how to go about this. The second, by myself, explains the nuts and bolts of Y-DNA testing and analysis, with chapters also on the activities of the McCarthy surname study. Today I'm going to take you from our study of the first millennium origins of the McCarthy kings of Cashel and Desmond to present-day McCarthy families. I must warn you straight away that only 30% of us can claim the regal descent in our paternal ancestry. The remaining 70% have acquired the name through other means, but we will still investigate these with vigour. All the more so if we can identify the McCarthy name having been in use for many centuries. In fact, for many of this 70%, we can trace their paternal ancestry much further back in the first millennium. The accompanying slideshow, entitled The Genetic Identification of McCarthys, will be made available at the foot of our scrapbook website, in the scholarly articles, presentations, etc. section. For this you can Google McCarthy Study plus scrapbook, but don't forget to include the word study. I want to set the scene by discussing first millennium genealogies, and although this is not specific to McCarthy's, it ably demonstrates the methodology applied to their investigation. Ireland is blessed with a wonderful set of ancient genealogies, going back way before the time of Christ. It is deduced there had been a strong oral tradition, with genealogies first written down perhaps in the 8th century and regurgitated regularly since then. There is also a series of annals, or diary records, going back into the first millennium and forward to about the 15th century. These comprise recordings by monks, mostly of deaths, often with genealogical data, of battles and cattle raids, and with a sprinkling of cosmic events which allow present-day researchers to verify or adjust their alignment. Textbook and internet origins of McCarthy's and other South Munster families are based on these ancient genealogies. Many historians are suspicious of them, arguing that new kids on the block around the 9th to the 11th centuries likely hired scribes to bolt their families onto established genealogies to give them historical eminence, while the earliest genealogies take us well into the realms of myth. Slide 3 indicates the origins of a number of surnames well established in Cork, Kerry, and to a lesser extent in their contiguous counties, i.e. in South Munster. I appreciate it may require magnification, but along or near the bottom we have first O'Sullivan, then McCarthy, O'Callaghan, followed by O'Keefe just a little way up, O'Mahony, O'Donoghue, O'Moriarty, and finally over on the right hand side, O'Donovan and Collins. The common ancestor of all of these is Uliel Flam Beck, although his great or great-great-grandfather, Uliel Olam, is better known. I have argued that Uliel Flam Beck was born about 285 AD. The timeline on each side of this slide is not to scale, but covers the period from Uliel Olam's death, recorded, rightly or wrongly, about 234 AD in the Annals of the Four Masters, to births about 980, shortly before surnames were beginning to be introduced in Ireland. The majority of lineages, those coming down from Conall Cork, are named after Uliel Olam's son Owen, or Owen More, and known as Owenacht. Note the McCarthys and O'Callaghans sharing a great-grandfather in Callachan of Cashel. Then further back said to share ancestry with O'Sullivans in the 6th century. The Eenti and Elihan connection on the right of slide 3, although not classified as Owenacht, is also nonetheless shown as descending from Owen. This has been doubted by many, although some acknowledge that a privileged position afforded them in some Owenacht dealings provided circumstantial evidence to support it. The best documented family here is the O'Donovans. We are today able to probe the veracity of these genealogies using the Y-DNA of present-day bearers of the surnames. And I stress Y-DNA and not the widely advertised autosomal DNA testing, which is the domain of Ancestry.com, MyHeritage and others, although also offered by Family Tree DNA. This will only take you back 5 or 6 generations down other lines. Y-DNA is handed down from father to son, etc. as an almost exact copy. When copying mistakes are made, we call them mutations. These are then perpetuated in subsequent generations. In genetic genealogy, we mostly use 2 particular types, SNPs or SNPs and STR mutations. The first are permanent, the second subject to further change from time to time, but on average no more than perhaps once in 100 generations. Working back from present-day populations, where clusters of men share a similar Y-DNA profile, we can determine when these mutations occurred, even to the extent of facilitating alignment with the timeline shown on these slides. So what does the Y-DNA tell us? In fact, some surprisingly good alignment, giving credence to the shared Uliel Flam Beck origin. On this slide, the dark cross-hatched blocks indicate misalignment, with corrections identified by Y-DNA testing highlighted lime green. There is perfect alignment between the largest clusters of South Munster O'Donohues and O'Mahonys, who share Owen-Ruthlin provenance, and then between them and the O'Keefes. There is also perfect alignment between these three and a high percentage of O'Donovans, although there is little or no evidence to support the Collins placement so far. The O'Moriartys for whom we have data are more closely related to the O'Donohues than indicated in the ancient genealogies, but certainly in the right area of the tree. In the late first millennium, they were living in close proximity around Loch Lane. Now we come to the misfits, the O'Sullivans, the McCarthys, and the 12% or so of O'Callaghan's who have derived their surname from Callaghan of Cashel, all supposedly descending from two 6th century brothers, Fineen and Fol de Flan. The brothers may have truly existed, but Y-DNA tells a different story. The O'Sullivans do certainly belong on this tree, but appear to descend independently from a brother of Conall Cork back in the 4th century. 3 elder brothers of Conall are named in the genealogies and shown on this slide. The McCarthy-O'Callaghan interrelationship is sound, as is their shared provenance in the late 9th-10th century ancestor Callaghan of Cashel, or at least his son Donogh. But somewhere before this it becomes completely detached from the historical tree. The disappearance from records of the Martini tribe at about this time is of interest to me. I have found no solid evidence for associating Callaghan with them, but circumstantial evidence provides a good fit. Yes, there are McCarthys, 20% of us, whose ancestry does align with one or another branch of this tree, myself included, but we are scattered about it and have acquired the name by means other than paternal descent from Corrach and the kings of Cashel and Desmond. For example, I found that my own Y-DNA and that of some West Cork distant McCarthy cousins, discovered through testing, sits on the male genetic tree amidst a sea of Regans. O'Regan is a heterogenetic name, that is, it has multiple sources. One is the 4 tribes of Tara, County Meath. A second supposedly descent from a paternal nephew of Brian Borrow. When I last looked, not one Regan Y-DNA sample aligned with this second source. Many Regan participants with Munster origins, though, share O'Donovan genetic ancestry about 700 to 800 AD. These share SMP Z16259. There is no mention of this in the genealogies, so I dug deeper into the annals. The annals of Innisfallen indicate, in the 8th century, a Riachan, 2 of whose progeny were chiefs among the Ienti, Bingo. Once upon a time, prior to 1500 AD, the time of my McCarthy cluster's most recent shared ancestor, we were O'Regans. With great help of a colleague, John Brazil, I think we have also pioneered a true Ilehan history, justifying its place on the historical tree. I have marked this with SMP A151. Worthy of note here is that the O'Connells of both Dingle Bay and East Cork share this common origin. Let's move into the 2nd millennium. The annals tell us that the eponymous Corrach, the progenitor of the McCarthy kings of Cashel and Desmond, was burned to death in 1045 in a house fire set by his enemies, the Lonagans, a scion of the growing O'Brien dynasty. The surname McCarthy was adopted for use by his progeny by the end of the century, and although ousted from Cashel by a combination of the O'Briens and the 1172 English invasion, they soon became all powerful in counties Cork and Kerry. Slide 5 shows the principal branches of the family established by the middle of the second millennium. In County Kerry we have the senior line of McCarthy More and the lords of Coshmong or Schlucht Owen More, while in County Cork there are the lords of Muskerry and of Duhallow, along with the by now fairly autonomous McCarthy Ray. The latter shares an ancestry in Donald Gott McCarthy with the Schlucht Phelimid of Glanachrim, the vale in which Dunmanway sits. Many branches of these septs created their own named subsepts as they further diverged. We have shown with Y-DNA that almost all our members with a paternal provenance identifiable as in Cork descended from one or the other of two brothers, Cormac Finn and Donald Gott McCarthy, and we have identified mutually exclusive genetic markers which distinguish them. They were born in the late 12th century. Just one small cluster with an origin in Cork, of 4 of our members so far, has a descent from neither of these brothers. In slide 6, we first trace the expansion of McCarthy family lines from County Tipperary, highlighted blue, through County Cork, highlighted red, and for the senior Moor line into County Kerry, highlighted green, in the 13th century, although several powerful branches of the family were soon to establish themselves in Cork, as just mentioned. I appreciate this may not be legible on a small screen, but want to point out a few key features. So here we have the 2 brothers I mentioned earlier, Cormac Finn and Donald Gott. Then among descendants of Cormac Finn, the McCarthys of Muskerry, the lords of Coshmong, and the senior Moor line coming down through Donald More. Again, mutations are highlighted yellow, showing alignment with DNA. Two English surveys at the end of the 16th century identified 11 septs, or family branches, of Kerry McCarthys, apart of course from the senior Moor one. Although there is some uncertainty as to which particular branch some refer to, for example, Clan Dermot, there are a number of candidates for being the eponymous Dermot, I have numbered these on this slide and, using the same reference, show precisely the lands, all but 3 of them, occupied in slide 7. So the numbers are up in the top right hand corner and they're dotted around on this slide. You will see from this map that the McCarthy sept lands were all to the south of the Dingle Peninsula. The map also shows the 3 principal castles serving the McCarthy Moor chiefs: Castle Loch, here, Palace, not too far away, and over in the west, Ballycarberry Castle. Our attempts to align our Kerry participants with their genetic profiles is full of ifs and buts, but we have a provisional alignment of several of the 11 septs in place. We urgently need other claimants to provenance in one sept or another, or simply those living on the ancient sept lands for as long as their families can remember, to step forward. The most wide-ranging book on McCarthy genealogies, was written by Judge Samuel Trant McCarthy and published in 1922. Samuel claimed ancestry in the Shlucht Cormac of Dongili and is a representative of his family who has been tested certainly belongs to the McCarthy-Moore line. Richard and John McCarthy, collaborators in the aforementioned Book 1 of Tracing Your McCarthy Family Tree, trace their origins to the McCarthys of Ardconnaught, and this is not disputed. However, they are much more closely related to the Shlucht Cormac of Dongili representative than the histories suggest. So one or other genealogy is misaligned between the 14th and 16th centuries. I argue in Book 2 that this is most likely the McCarthys of Ardconnaught, but detail an alternative lineage for them throughout this period. We also have a well-documented representative of the McCarthys of Muskerry, with whom two other members, who had no idea about their origins, share 15th century paternal ancestry. But again, we would like some further claimants to represent the sept to step forward. A relatively large group of our members is strongly suspected as belonging to the Shlucht Owen Moor, or the Lords of Coshmong, or Bordmong. This would be consistent in relation to the genetic profiles of the Kerry septs already mentioned, although one genetic subgroup, tracing back to the northern shore of the Burra Peninsula, had believed they were more likely descended from the Macfinine McCarthys of Ardtully. We don't yet clearly identify a genetic marker for the MacDonagh McCarthys, the Lords of Dualla. It is quite likely that we already have a descendant of the lineage among the unallocated members of the McCarthy-Moore genetic line in our study. If the current alignment configuration is correct, we have one or two candidates by default. But what has happened to the children of the other septs since 1595? Did they all become extinct in their male line, with losses at Kinsale in 1601, in the Cromwellian Wars in the 1640s, the Boyne in 1690, and Ockham in 1691? Did they all migrate to Catholic Europe after the Treaty of Limerick in 1691, never to return? I suspect a number did surreptitiously return, and even if the soldiers were lost, they must have left some fatherless young sons, who perhaps became tenant farmers in the 18th century, remaining on their ancient sept lands. We want more McCarthys with Kerry roots testing to probe further. Here we have an outline of Donald Gott's progeny, mostly in County Cork. A much greater amount of detail, sometimes coming down to very recent times, is again shown in Figure 2 on our scrapbook website. We have a considerable number of members whose known origins lie in the region of Dunmanway. Many share a genetic branch which aligns with the Shlucht Phalamid, although at present there remains a small chance they could instead belong on a branch of its cousins in the McCarthy-Raig dynasty. We are in the process of identifying genetic profiles for various strands of the McCarthy-Raig, but again ask claimants with family law indicating such origins to step forward. Our data indicates that 22% of all McCarthys descend from Donald Gott. So our paternal ancestry conclusions so far are as follows. 30% of McCarthys descend from the eponymous Corach and the kings of Cashel and Desmond, but not from Ulliel Olam. 20% of McCarthys descend from Ulliel Olam, but not from the McCarthy kings of Cashel and Desmond. So what about the other 50%? They too have acquired the name through some affiliation with the McCarthys. For example, taking a McCarthy stepfather's name, taking a McCarthy mother's surname because of its prowess, illegitimacy arising from any form of liaison and taking the McCarthy mother's surname again, or simply employment by or service to the McCarthy dynasty. In more recent times, many McCarthy families have gained new supplementary names or agnomina to distinguish one from another. Here we list sept names and agnomina for which we have identified a genetic profile. This work often hints at a different surname with whom paternal ancestry is shared. For example, the McCarthys Cunnick clearly share Crowley ancestry. The McCarthys Cruig derived from a branch of the O'Sullivans. A small but widely distributed McCarthy group derived from Clan Collar ancestry. O'Briens, like McCarthys, appear everywhere in today's Munster genetic profiles, and a few of our McCarthy members share Brian Boru's ancestry, although none so far can claim the man himself as a direct ancestor. A reminder again of our books to guide you through your investigation, and to finish, we provide a price list for testing your Y-DNA with Family Tree DNA. Please note that further prices are available for upgrading from one level of test to another. And with that, I conclude this brief survey of the genetic identification of McCarthys. Thank you.
Right, so guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. It's incredible how far back the history goes, and our job really is to try and get together the ultimate McCarthy story, bring people together, let them find out their connections, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. We're going to have lots of initiatives around how people come together, but first and foremost, if you come to Ireland101, get in touch through McCarthy, the McCarthy page, and we'll keep the conversation going. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much, Nigel. Really appreciate it.